Welcome to Navigating India. This episode is a true fanboy moment for me. I'm in conversation with Arunava Sinha, who translate works from Bengali to English and vice versa. I read his works compulsively, both with delight and devotion. He published 96 works and hitting 100 if we include the books coming out this year. His Twitter bio reads, quote, hashtag now translating a literary novel by day and classic short story by night, stop quote. It perfectly sums him up. Arunava Sinha, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on this podcast.
We are recording this episode a few days after you have launched your own publishing house, the Chaurangi Press, where you want to make Indian translations available for readers outside India. And few weeks after a work of English translation of Kannada stories winning the International Booker Prize. What this movement means to you as a translator?
What you refer to as a publishing house is actually not anything quite as grand or exalted. I've just launched a small imprint on a self-publishing platform currently being run out of the US with the idea of putting some books out for people to order directly from the US and UK and other parts of the world outside of India, because they normally don't have access to many works that are published in India and stay in India. I'm hoping to turn it into a translators collective. More details as we go along. It's really an experiment, but I'm excited about it. As for the news that came earlier, that was, of course, a brilliant moment by any standards. Banu Mushtaq's stories, which have been handpicked and then translated by Deepa Bhashti, making it all the way to the very top of the International Booker and winning the award is an extraordinary achievement and speaks volumes for the quality of the both of the literatures that come out of India as well as the quality of the translated works that come out of India. And being the second Booker, which also means that Indian books have won more international Bookers than from any other country, only a country to have got 2 out of 10. It's clearly a moment that international publishers should be examining carefully and asking themselves why they don't publish more literatures in translation from India. The unfortunate answer to that is that they don't. I hope that will change. Meanwhile, all my congratulations to Deepa and to Banu for this incredible achievement.
That is interesting. But can we equate this to the Salman Rushdie movement in Indian literature? For the benefit of listeners, Salman Rushdie won the Booker Prize in 1981 for his book Midnight's Children. He's the first Indian to win this prize, and it positioned the English literature from India in the global arena. The Booker Prize should not be confused with the International Booker Prize. The Booker Prize is awarded to novels which are originally written in English language, while the International Booker Prize, which started in 2004, is meant to celebrate the translated works. So, International Booker Prize cannot be given to novels originally published in English, right? So, it can be written in any other language and has to be translated in English to be eligible for this prize. And this is typically awarded to both author and the translator. In 2022, Tomb of Sand, a novel written by Geetanjali Shree in Hindi and translated by Dicey Rockwell into English, won the International Booker Prize, the first Indian to receive that International Booker Prize. And in 2023, the Pyre novel written by Perumal Murugan and translated by Anirudhan Vasudevan from Tamil to English was longlisted. And now in 2025, we have Banu Mushtaq's Kannada stories translated by Deepa Bhashti into English, winning the International Booker Prize. So, can we see this as another Salman Rushdie movement in the Indian literature?
No. First of all, it's very unfortunate when we look at the quality of literature only in terms of whether it brings about a great response from publishers. That's not the best way to look at the quality of any kind of writing or books, right? That is a very commercial response. A publisher decides to publish literatures from India because they feel that it will be successful in the market. That is not a literary response. It is a response that is based on the possibility of getting more buyers and more readers, because it is not tenable, it is not acceptable to believe that it needed all these years for the quality of Indian literatures to be recognized. We all know how good it is. So, what you are referring to as the floodgates being opened will be at best a commercial moment. It will not be a literary moment. The way Salman Rushdie's work was recognized was also similar, in the sense that while the book was fantastic and needed to be read, it also created a slipstream for something called Indian writing in English. And the moment you start using these labels and putting books into boxes, you are already transforming the nature of literature into a product aimed at a market. And that, to my mind, is not the best way. The best literature comes when it is not aimed at the market. When the first flood of Latin American literature, the first flush came to us, it wasn't because publishers thought that they would be incredible commercial success. Likewise for Japanese. But since then, a lot of books from these two countries, geographies, Latin America and Japan, get published with an eye on sales. And that doesn't always mean that the best books get published, or it might even mean too many books get published. It is going to be a commercial response. We didn't see such a response when Gitanjali Shri's Tomb of Sand won the Booker. I'm not sure that we will see a similar response this time either. It would be great if it happened, because it would get more books into the hands of readers outside of India. But I'm not sure that it will happen. And also, if it happens, it will be based on a commercial trend.
That is a very good perspective. I want to explore more on this. But before that, I want to ask you something about an interview that you gave for the Hindu newspaper. In that interview, you said you almost translate compulsively. In another piece that you wrote for the Seminar magazine, you say that the first lesson of translating is to love, right? So, how do you fall in love with translations, and what motivates you to translate every day?
It's um, all of us read books in translation without very often realizing that translation is a separate process from the writing of the book. We just lower our disbelief and we assume that this is the way the book was written. But as a matter of fact, anything we read from any language that we cannot read in originally is written, actually every word in it is the translators, it is not the writers. So once you kind of realize this, you start looking at the ways in which people translate. And this realization came to me quite early on when I was in college. And so I told myself, let's have a go at it to see what it's like. And then it was something that I discovered I really enjoyed. I think many, not all, but many translators love translating because they don't have to worry about what to write. They're good with writing, but they don't necessarily have the material. So other people's books become our material. And if you love something, you just do it as often as you can. It's as simple as that. So that's what I meant by compulsive.
No, I want to talk about this, which is that how do you think this advent of AI doing everything will affect the whole translation and translators? So, what is your view on that?
So if you look at the way AI is being developed, it is being developed with commercial intent. It is not a project aimed at furthering the frontiers of science or technology. And the primary commercial intent seems to be of acquiring scale in activities that were earlier performed or that are still performed by human beings. Scale, speed, and the replacement of humans with AI, right? So that is where the thrust of the investment and the thrust of the technological development is going. Now, translation is not a commercial activity. Not many publishers make a great deal of money from translated books. Only bestsellers, the kind of thrillers and so on, are big commercial projects for publishers. And so when a Dan Brown writes a new book, or a Murakami, who's not a thriller writer but who is a very popular writer, so Popular writers' works go into translation with the intent of making money for publishers. And translators get paid so little out of this that the cost of developing AI to replace translators, I think, will be higher than actually replacing them. So, as a technological project, I don't see it happening for literature. It will certainly happen for documents and information and so on. It's already happening for that matter. So the other thing that's more important is whether AI is capable of literary translation. Because first and foremost, translation involves reading. And reading is not just a matter of knowing the dictionary meaning of every word or phrase. Literature comes not from what is explicitly said alone, but from what is not said, the silences, the music, what is implied, what makes the reader's memory work, what makes the reader's imagination work. Someday in the future, maybe there will be an AI program that can read like a human being. It isn't here yet. I don't think it's going to be, despite the very quick strides being made, I don't expect it to be here in my lifetime for the same reason that there is no return that anyone can expect in developing such a program unless it becomes very cheap to develop. But as a translator, I would love it if AI could help me. I would love it if AI could do my research, for example, right? I would love it if AI can provide some answers to my questions. Unfortunately, it is not able to do that yet. It hallucinates. And so far, the knowledge that AI brings to the table is what it has gathered from other texts. It does not use imagination. It does not use insights. So, this massive data processing and language learning capability can only reproduce what already exists. It cannot be original. And any creative work has to have a high degree of originality in it, right? And who knows where our originality comes from? It comes from our subconscious or unconscious. It comes from all that we've read, heard, all that we imagine, all that we fantasize about. These things are still the domain of the human mind.
I mean, that's where I want to pick up the next question. You are now the professor of creative writing at Ashoka University. Um, how do you teach people how to translate? Is it possible? Like,
Certainly, just as how do you teach people how to sing? How do you teach people how to dance? There are some techniques involved, but most of all, it has to do with sustained practice and improvement through practice. So much of my teaching actually involves not theory, not how to translate, but actually translating, looking at what is being translated, and then seeing how to make it better.
can you give us one exercise that you do to your students to improve their translation skills?
Well, one of the exercises I do very early on is I get my students to translate bird song. I play the singing of birds and I tell them, imagine what you're hearing and put it down. Because when we see the written text, we are very often so focused on the meanings of the words that we do not sit back and allow anything else to seep into our heads. When you listen to music, there are no words. You don't know what it means in the conventional sense. So you try to find meaning in tone, in volume, in suggestion. So these are the faculties of the translator that I try to develop through this exercise by denying them access to words that can yield meaning.
I want to ask this next question. Sometimes some emotions are very tough to translate. For example, especially when it comes to humor, right? What is something which might be very humorous in a very native language? You translate from Bengali, may not translate it completely into English. How do you tackle these challenges while capturing emotions?
Let's say something funny that was said. So what you will write in translation must also be funny in the new language. That's all there is to it. And that's true not just of humor, but of everything. Whatever the underlying uh, non-tangible elements of a sentence are, must all come out through your translated version. And it cannot always come out by translating every word. There has to be a collective whole about it. There has to be a rasa. There has to be a certain um, for the lack of a better word, essence that comes through each sentence or each phrase or even each word sometimes. And you must use the abilities of the language in which you are translating to bring those out. So Anthea Bell, the legendary translator who used to translate the Asterix comics, what she would do was, she said that she didn't translate each joke. What she did was, she said, if there are 3 jokes on a page in the French version, I will put in 3 jokes in the English version per page. But they may not be the same jokes. But it is still a funny piece of writing. So that's how you go about these things.
So that gives a sense of power to the translator over the original, right? And that will be a whole lot of a different debate. How do you see that? The power which the translators can have.
No, I don't see it as a sense of power at all. I see it as a sense of flexibility that is required to actually be true to the original. If you only stick to the precise words, you will not be true to the original, because those words will not mean the same thing at all in a new language. So you need to bring in that creative ability to be able to say the same thing that the original text is saying, but not necessarily using the same words. And when I say the same thing, again, as I keep emphasizing, it is not just about the dictionary meaning of the words. It is about what is implied, what is nudged at, what buttons you're trying to press in the reader's head, what ambiguities you're leaving in there, what options you're leaving for the reader to interpret what has been said. So, if anything, these things make the translator more responsible, not less, to the original text.
I want to ask you about things that are lost in the translation. I'm reminded of this famous piece published by Rand Bloom in the New Yorker in 2012, where he discussed about the various translations of the first line of Albert Camus' novel, The Stranger, that is translated from French. Few authors translated it as Mother Died Today, and a few translated it as Mummy Died Today. And few authors stuck to the original and used the French word Maman died today. And each of this evokes different emotion to the reader. What does it say about the things that might be lost in translation of emotions not being exactly conveyed? What are your views on this?
I don't think anything has to be lost in translation at all. Things change. But when they change, they don't lose value. They remain as valuable, or they can even gain value. It's just that you have to be true to the language in which you're translating. And there's no use wringing your hands over the lack of equivalent words. Sometimes you may want to use 3 words instead of 1. If there is a certain feeling that is missing in a new language, you have to examine why that is the case. Sometimes you may want to lend a word or two to the new language. Sometimes you may want to arrive at that intangible underlying in other ways. There may not be a word precisely in English that conveys the idea of mama in French. And how can we make the reader feel the same way when they read the way the narrator of The Outsider or The Stranger refers to his mother? That is the translator's challenge. A translator can cop out and use a simple word and leave it there, and maybe they'll have 95% of the sense of it. But it is that final 5% or the final 1% even that very often is elusive. And that is where the true challenge of translation lies. Otherwise, AI could do it. AI can look at mama and translate it as mummy or mum or mother or mom. It doesn't matter. The question is, will an AI program know what is implied in mama, not just what the familial relationship that is being described?
So, how do we develop a translator ecosystem in India? Because you are one of the successful translators in India. I think you have now 100 plus titles. Uh,
No,
uh,
not 100 yet. Getting there.
okay, you're at 100. I just looked up your website. You're like forthcoming. It is around
Yeah, yeah. If you include
100.
what's forthcoming.
It includes it's around 100. How do we develop this translator ecosystem in India? Is the ground fertile in India right now? Because I'm asking this question, especially because after the recent issue of a JCB prize for translation being shut down, and you also have made a comment on it in the scroll. So how do you see, how do we develop this ecosystem, and what are the challenges which this translation ecosystem has to overcome?
So the real challenge for translation, what you call the translation ecosystem, is that we just don't have any translations taking place between the non-English Indian languages. That is where the real famine has struck. There are quite a lot of translators now working into English, and we can, of course, do more, have more, and they are, in fact, a lot more young people are translating now. So that aspect, I think, is being covered. What we are missing are translators, let's say, who can work from Hindi into Tamil, from Malayalam into Gujarati, from Kashmiri into Telugu, and so on. That is the area that we need to develop, and for that, we have to figure out ways in which a person can actually be fluent, literate in at least two non-English languages of India. Mm, that's a skill that most of us have lost. Those who live, many people have some idea of some kind of a widely used language other than English, which in many parts of India, though not all, is Hindi. But precisely the geographical divide between the south and the north, or the east and the west, or the east and the south, and so on, is so large that almost nobody is fluent enough in any two languages from each of these regions. That is something that we have to think about and find ways to start schools for training translators. But then the question is, why will anyone want to acquire these skills? Why will anyone want to be a translator? So there has to be, this is where the word ecosystem comes in. There has to be a whole ecology of rewards and honor and respect and publishing, which unfortunately does not exist and which is dwindling in India. Even those who publish in the non-English languages, most of them are, there are a few indie publishers who are looking at publishing translations, but the really big ones, the ones who have the wherewithal to reach out widely, do not publish translations from other languages. Malayalam is an exception, but not others. So that is the space hole that needs to be plugged.
I'm from Andhra Pradesh. My native language is Telugu, and I genuinely lament that there were no more translated books coming,
Yeah,
especially from Telugu.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, South surely faces that challenge. Okay, so one point you said is the translation between the non-English languages. The second point I want to ask is about the genre, which is that while the fiction is getting more and more translated, non-fiction itself has another challenge. What are your comments on that?
Yeah, that's exactly why at the Shuka Center for Translation, we have started translating these books of nonfiction. Our first series of books, titled Chronicles, is being published in collaboration with Penguin Random House. And a second series will be coming up soon. So yes, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of very valuable literature that is locked up outside of fiction and even poetry in various Indian languages, and these certainly need to be unlocked and made available to readers in other languages.
So that's my next question on. Yeah, of course, I've read one of them, A Glimpse of Life, the Bismillah Khan's autobiography translation. So that's where my next question is. So, how do we think we can develop the reader ecosystem for this translated, both fiction and non-fiction? Because how do we find the readers?
So we have a readership crisis in India, readership crisis for serious writing. Whatever readership there is increasingly veering towards instrumental reading, things that will enable you to learn something, be more skillful, and so on. So these are very hard skills, technology, health, spirituality, very tangible skills. What I think people don't realize is that reading just makes you better in every respect. I don't mean in a moral sense, but they just make you more capable of dealing with the world, of thinking incisively, of thinking critically, of thinking with sensitivity and sympathy. Unfortunately, these qualities in human beings are not prized um, in India at the moment. You are thought to be successful only if you are very hard nosed and focused on making great money, uh, starting startups that become unicorns, writing code. As long as the focus is on these aspects of life, without anyone realizing that you're not even going to be able to do these things well unless you read, we are going to face this readership crisis. And publishers who are commercially oriented do not try to shape taste. They just go with whatever readers, whatever the demand is. So, which is why you see, if you look at the big publishers, their focus on serious literature has dwindled in the sense that they still publish those books, but they do not give them enough attention in the marketplace for selling them, for marketing them, and so on. They'd much rather focus on self help, spirituality, chronicles of the army, uh, not even star biographies, not even those, which are so big in the West. So maybe it'll need an entire generation of new readers to be developed or to realize for themselves that unless you read, you are just going to be sucked up. With this giant machine of AI now looming over us and threatening jobs and so on, I have a feeling that people are going to start looking at imaginative ways of developing themselves. And maybe, if we are lucky, reading serious books in fiction as well as non-fiction will be one of them, even for developing themselves. But at the end of the day, it is not just about being a person who's more capable of holding a job or earning more money or running a great business. It is about making the most of our human existence. It is about making the most of what we are capable of as human beings. And the very fact that humans have created art, whether it's in the form of literature, theater, painting, film, cinema, and so on, theater, and so on, proves that art is very integral to the potential of the human existence. Why were cave people who were so threatened by their environment? I mean, there was no knowing whether they would live to see the next day. Why did they make art? There must be something very intrinsic about it, right? By moving away from art, we are actually denying ourselves our basic humanness. So I think some of us are hopeful that these are cycles and that it will come back.
I want to pick up another question. When I ask my students to read, so they also ask me about give them the readings which will be productive, but not read for just for experiential purposes, right? I'm sure you as a teacher will also face this trouble between the productive reading and experiential reading. So how do you tackle this question when it comes to you?
I just ignore it. I tell them my class is not about being productive at all. That I am actually, if you are taking this course, you will be completely unsuited to earn a living or to make your way in the world. So take this course only on that assumption.
Okay, that's a simple answer. This is another question, which is so when we walk into bookshops now, when we see these books from other Asian languages, especially these books, the motivation genre, the so-called healing literature, the motivating literature, that being predominantly put, then the literary experience itself. And now I don't see that much of India having that kind of literature being translated. Is it because we don't have vernacular literature, which is mostly the healing literature, or we are not focusing it on, in our translations?
Yeah. Western publishers have seriously asked us, is there something you can do with yoga, for example? But the point is that these are commercially curated lists. And then writers and translators in other parts of the world also sometimes jump on the bandwagon. They see that healing literature is big. Let's quickly write a book featuring a cat, a cafe, and a library. Fortunately, we have been spared such bandwagons. And so writers here continue to write what they really want to write. And I think that's the right way of doing it.
Okay, because you brought up the writers, I want to ask about three writers whose works you have translated, and the first one being Shankar, right? Your first work is translated, which is Chaurangi novel by Shankar. Would you reflect on your relationship with the text of Shankar as well as with Shankar himself?
Well, obviously, he was very kind in asking me to translate Chorangi when I was a nobody. Absolutely. I'd only translated one of his short stories, and it changed my life. So what can I say? Nothing has been more transformative, to use the word of MBAs, is the word that MBAs like. Nothing has been more transformative for me than the opportunity to translate Shankar's works. So Shankar occupies the middle ground between popular writing and the so-called literary writing. His writing is extremely accessible, very stylish. It is not bland because it is accessible. It has its own unique touch and style, which you learn to appreciate when you translate, because then you're reading a text very, very closely. But at the same time, his insights into human behavior are so profound that he effortlessly also goes into the area that serious literature does. But he does it without intellectualizing it, which is why he has been popular with some two or three generations of Bengali readers. And it was a true privilege to be able to translate him.
One of my favorite works of your translated works is There is Gunpowder in the Air by Manoranjan Bypari, right? And you translated another novel by him. So how was your working with Manoranjan Bypari? Tell us something about him.
Well, that too has been fantastic. You can listen to his stories for hours. All his stories are from his life, and he has had the most incredible life. I mean, he's had the life of 10 individuals or 100 individuals, and he's packed them all into his own existence. He is a dynamo. He is full of energy. He um, he doesn't read English, but he has complete faith in his translators. And I learned about a whole new world thanks to him. It was a world that, the in Bengal we don't have the caste division is not very prominent, but the class division is, and very often class actually maps onto caste. So there are entire worlds that are closed to the middle class. They are never part of it. They don't even know of its existence. And reading and translating Manoranjan Bapari has been an opportunity to learn of this other world. And that's what reading is. It allows you to experience worlds that you cannot normally occupy in the course of your single life. So not only did it widely um, expand my experience of the world, but it also made me very happy to be able to bring this world into a language in which such worlds are not normally read about. Now, of course, over the past few years, we have had a great deal of writing by those who identify as Dalits being translated into English, and that has completely changed the way readers know about their own country and their own society.
Would you share a small snippet of Manoranjan Bypari's story which has greatly impressed you or stayed with you?
Well, um, I kept nagging him about something. I kept asking him, "Have you ever killed anyone?" And every time I asked him, he said, "If you ask me no question, then you'll hear no lies." And then he said, "It isn't in my autobiography, but it's in my fiction. Now make of that what you will."
Okay, I don't want to get into trouble. The last individual I want to ask about is Anita Agrihotri's work, I just started reading The Touch of a Salt, an extremely fascinating novel. And the one thing about her work is there is blurring of lines between fiction and non-fiction, right? It's a trouble jumping between the both. So your reflections on her work.
Yes, yes, yes. I think anyway, the old lines between fiction and non-fiction are increasingly being blurred by a lot of writing today around the world. And I think it's an open acknowledgement of the fact that the world that we now occupy itself is the stage. The stage is not a purely imaginary stage at all. And therefore, to understand what's going on in this world, the imagination is used to construct events, but we need to understand the backdrop. We need to understand what is happening behind the scenes, as it were. So, to my mind, this um, a story is a story is a story. Whether it is fiction or non-fiction, to me is meaningless. I think we should stop distinguishing between this. We can talk about books that try to convey information and books that work on the imagination. But beyond that, I don't see any need to separate what's called narrative nonfiction from fiction. They both tell stories. They both tell stories. What we call fiction, Manoranjan Bapari being an example, all of it is from his own life. So would you call that fiction or non-fiction? Are we calling it fiction only because it is not acknowledged as the truth? But it is the truth. Arundhati Roy, when she wrote a second novel, said The reason I wrote this as fiction and not as history is that fiction doesn't need footnotes. It, but it doesn't need citations. But it's still the truth. Fiction is the truth. Non-fiction is the truth. So, to my mind, um, this what we call blurring is actually a more honest way of responding to the world and of talking to the world in which we live in. And we live in the most urgent of times. We also have a better sense of history now, thanks to all the various ways in which we learn about history. Earlier, it used to be the preserve of arcane textbooks. Now, history comes at us in many ways. So, our understanding of the world, of geography, of space and time has improved vastly. And all of it has to be fed back into our writing. So, Anita Agnihotri's writing to me is a harbinger of what there can be and what there will be.
Okay, this might be a little bit a reckless question, which is this. There are authors who engage themselves in like dissecting the literature, the critical aspects of it. But from our conversation, what I get from you is you are in a sense a very organic about the translation, right? You translate when you love it and you go with it, right? So how do you approach this critical dissection of literature? Do you enter into these debates?
Um, Sometimes, but it doesn't infect my practice as a translator. Um, I translate the way a reader would translate. So I'm a reader, first of all. I'm not a critic when I'm translating. So I put on the reader's hat, I read very closely, and I translate what I'm reading. What I'm reading is not just what I'm seeing with my eyes, but also what I'm hearing with my ears, what I'm imagining with my head, and so on. I'm not there to critique what the writer has written. I'm not there to say I don't agree with this, or I think um, this philosophy doesn't grab me, and so on and so forth, right? For me, excellence is measured in diversity. And if we are going to say that diversity is important, we have to accept that it will include a lot of things that we ourselves may not subscribe to. But that is the whole point, right? I forget who it was who said this, but he said something, they said something to the effect that a fine intellect is one that can hold two opposing ideas in their head at the same time without necessarily rejecting either of them. Um, so that's the thing. You don't have to be a critic. You can just look at the beauty of ideas and of the way they're put there and of the stories. Some may appeal to you, some may not. But if you believe in diversity, then all of it must exist.
Okay, one more question is the number of books you translate in an year is more than number of books an average Indian would read in a year, right? So do you read to translate? Do you translate everything that you read? How does this process go?
No, no, no. Reading is a separate process. But of course, when I'm reading books, Bangla books, there's always an antenna up there saying, is this book worth translating? But I also read a lot of Bangla books that have already been translated. So that's not the primary reason I read.
So how do you select? So how do you select? You choose a text, or is it being always commissioned? So how does that?
So it variety of ways. But mostly it's when I read something that I feel it's like a song. You hear a song and you want to sing it, right? You don't want to sing every song you hear. So it's very hard to put your finger on it. But there's something that just grabs you and you feel that you want to do this. But of course, there are other factors. I mean, I have translated books where we have found it hard to get publishers. Increasingly, I'm getting into that space where I now translate a book and I'm not even sure if it'll find a publisher, which is fine with me. We'll see what happens. All other things being equal, I try to look at voices that are on the margins, but all other things being equal. So it's not that I will translate a book only because it has come from a writer on the margins, but also that it is something that grabs me, that I love, and so on. So it's translators are gatekeepers, and therefore they are not to be trusted. So any translator who says these are the best books is not to be trusted. These are the books that they like the most. That's as far as it goes. Which is also why whenever I produce these anthologies, I always make it very clear that I'm not trying to say these are the best. It's that these are the things that I love the most.
You put me in trouble because that's what gonna be my next question. But I'll try to modify a little bit and ask you, who do you think as a good translators whose work should be read, if not the
Everybody.
books?
Read every translated book. No one picks a bad book to translate. The book is great. The translation may always not be great, but if the book is great, its quality will still shine through the translation.
Okay, I'm
So I'm saying just read every translated book. Of course, there are translators whom individual readers trust more, whose tastes are more aligned to their tastes, maybe who they feel do a better job of translating. But there again, it's not a unanimous choice. There are translations which some people love and others turn their noses up at. So I don't. I think we should respect individual taste and not try to say everybody must read this book.
okay. It's tough to get a talisman out of you, but I'm gonna ask this question. Any suggestions for the young translators that you want to give?
Yeah, for every book you want to translate, read 100 books. 100 out of which 50 can be in the language from which you're translating and 50 in the language into which you're translating. And practice every day. Practice your translation every day. It's not for nothing that classical musicians and dancers do their riyaz every single day. Can you imagine a classical musician doesn't even perform for an audience until they've trained for 10, 12, 15 years? Same with dancers. Imagine if translators could afford that kind of practice and training. We can't, but how wonderful it would be if we could. So, practice is everything.
I think now I can estimate the number of books that you read. But Arunava Sinha, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.